What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Mazique, aka Unique Mazique, the hardest working man in sports and gaming. I am a fight guy. I'm a Forbes contributor, and I also write for Heavy.com. And I'd like to welcome in my fellow fight guy and fellow Forbes contributor, also candidate for Boxing Manager of the Year 2019, Peter Kahn. What's going on today, Pete?
Hey, how are you, man?
I'm doing all right. It doesn't sound like I'm doing as good as I actually am, but
you look good.
That I know. That I know. The yellow.
I mean, look, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so you know it's
the yellow and the melanin is blending really beautifully, I think.
Yeah, it's a nice glow today. I like it.
So. I think so. I'm pregnant.
Okay.
I kill me. All right, so I just want everybody to know we are powered by Fight TV and we are presented by Bet Online. If you're not watching us on YouTube, you should be. You should actually ball your fist up and punch yourself in the face right now if you're not following us on YouTube, because you should be. Go to YouTube, search The Fight Guys. As Peter just mentioned, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We are here. We are live, but also on YouTube. You see other content that we have in the combat sports realm, and also on Fight TV. Go ahead and subscribe to their app. They have an entirely different brand of combat sports content there as well. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's show, round one. Right now, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on today. This is funny how this Friday in combat sports kind of developed. But one of the things we got to talk about is what to expect from boxing when it actually returns. I think we all know that it will. We have a guest that's going to come on today. We're going to talk to DiBella, the founder, president of DiBella Promotions, former head of HBO Boxing. I want to talk to him about what he thinks about this whole thing. But Peter, you are absolutely in position to speak about what you think this is going to look like once we actually return. So give us a little bit of an update.
So, I talked to all of the promoters, that being Top Rank, Matchroom, Lou DiBella Entertainment, Golden Boy, because I work with even PBC, because I have fighters that are with all of the promoters, and every promoter is working on a plan to have boxing return when it's safe to return, in a controlled environment with no live audience. Everybody's working on that scenario. I think Top Rank might be looking at something mid to late June. I think Matchroom might be able to even look at something maybe the end of May, maybe mid-June as well. Eddie Hearn did a press conference with one of my fighters yesterday, George Kambosos Jr., who's fighting Lee Selby for the IBF Eliminator. And, you can find that on Twitter, on Matchroom's Twitter. And he even talked about, he said, give me a week or two to be able to give a date. Now that date might be forward-looking, maybe the end of the summer, but they are planning on getting up and running. Everybody's looking for a scenario. So what I think is going to happen is, I think in the beginning, we're going to see some smaller shows, maybe 5 fight per show shows. I think we're going to see it in a studio environment where it's just the participants. We're not going to get the big world title fights we're looking for, because promoters just feasibly can't afford to forego a $10 or $15 million gate in order to put on some of these shows. Plus, I think part of those shows, whether it's a Canelo Triple G or a Wilder or a Fury Wilder 3 or a Lomachenko Lopez, or even a Crawford Spence Crawford, however you want to headline that, those have to take place in front of a live audience. Those fights have to take place in front of a full capacity arena. It adds to that excitement. I do think we are going to see a version of boxing similar to how we saw WrestleMania. We're just going to see people in the ring doing their thing. I think it's going to be a little bit strange, but I think we're going to get better fights, because I think what's going to happen is we're going to see some really strong competition, maybe on the lower end of the higher end, if that makes sense. We're not going to get world title fights and eliminators and unifications, but we are going to get some pretty solid fights. And I think that from a competitive standpoint, that's going to really interest boxing fans. The odds makers like Bet Online are going to be putting odds out for those fights. And I think it's going to be sooner than later, with some states looking to create ways where some of these things can happen. But, it's definitely in the works. I mean, this is a daily conversation that literally every promoter is having. No one's sitting back waiting for this to be perfect, because it's not going to be perfect for a while.
Yeah, it's funny because what it appears, and what it was pretty clear, I think, is that combat sports and things like WWE or whatever are really going to lead the way back to professional sports, live professional sports. It's happening already. For all of the criticism that he gets and oftentimes deserves, Dana White is going to put on the first live sporting event in the United States. And people can say whatever they want to say, but most people are going to appreciate this event who have any appetite for the UFC. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But one of the things that I'm going to ask Lou for sure, and I'm going to throw out there to you too now, and I've mentioned this to you before, is being really open-minded and trying some different things from a presentation standpoint that maybe you can't or don't even need to do when you have a live audience. Like, I think really one of the things, and I know it's really hard to draw this parallel because the two things are so different, but I think anybody who enjoyed WrestleMania will tell you that the best part of WrestleMania was the heavily produced aspect of the show. The live wrestling, or what seemed to be live wrestling or whatever, was cool and fine, and there were some really good points there. But the highlights were the Firefly Funhouse and the Boneyard match between Undertaker and AJ Styles. And I know I'm losing some people who are not wrestling fans when I'm saying this.
But they need to check it out.
But they need to check it out, because I believe that there is something that can be taken from the way WWE presented those things, because the thing of it is, their audience is accustomed, or had been accustomed to, watching live in-ring action. And they had to come up with a way to engage their audience without having that and that fan interaction there. And I think they effectively did that. Now, I don't think you saw those matches.
I did.
Okay, you saw those. Okay.
I watched them on Fight TV.
Okay, outstanding. So can you tell me, if you can imagine, and I know I may be putting you on the spot here, is there a way that you can imagine they can incorporate some of those elements in a boxing presentation? Absolutely.
So first of all, for the people that haven't seen it, what Brian is saying is it was very theatrical. So, but because wrestling is scripted, there's more control. So they were able to really make a nice theatrical, aesthetic to it, right? And so in boxing, obviously, we don't know, this is not scripted, so we don't know what's going to happen. But to your point, I think that they could take more time to really be embedded in the entire fight experience. So, maybe it's trying out new things. Maybe it's literally from the dressing room, the entire warm up, the whole vibe, not just cutting to where you get, all of us in there clapping while the guy's hitting some mitts. I'm talking about the entire process. Right? Like the entire hit the venue, in the dressing room, really starting to feel what it's like as these guys are preparing to go to battle. Maybe having somebody embedded ringside, because you don't have any impediments of a live audience. No. You're not going to be in anyone's way. Maybe there's other angles. There's going to be no, like I said, there's just going to be no way that you're blocking anyone's vision. So, maybe there are different camera angles that can be experimented with. Maybe maybe everyone's mic'd up in the corner. Maybe you're really getting a feel for what it's like, a more point of view look at the fight. Whatever that is, maybe you have a chest cam for the cornerman, and so you're literally looking from the cornerman's eyes into the fighter in between rounds. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going on what you said. I think that if there's a time to experiment that would be acceptable, if it didn't necessarily come out the way that maybe it was envisioned, this would be that time. because who's going to hold anyone to fault for trying to make something more entertaining?
Yes. I think statistics and analytics is something that this particular time period in this situation could help usher in with boxing. Right now, the only analytics or statistics that we get is punch stat numbers, and I think everybody who knows while we often refer to it, it's a very flawed sort of much less than comprehensive sort of way to judge anything by, right?
But I want to cut you off there.
Yeah.
Because I don't want it to go and then come back to, but look, CompuBox was a great addition to boxing.
Absolutely.
Punch stats, and I know what you mean by this, because believe me, I've always tried to justify a loss by saying, well, he threw more punches or he landed more punches. And that, to your point, when you say flawed, and I want to ask, because I want to make sure I know it's all how you look at it. Because boxing is judged in 3-minute increments, the overall picture of punch stats doesn't really tell why one guy won or didn't win.
Right. That is part of what I'm saying. But the other aspect of what I mean is that the way it's even tabulated literally is someone hitting a button, punch landed, which obviously opens up the door for a human error, all sorts of things, right? Obviously, these people are trained in this specific version of data entry, but at the same token, it's not as official as, say, a machine or some sort of application that is there to encompass all of the things that takes place in the boxing ring to kind of judge who's getting the advantage or not. Because one of the things that we never see is we hear people talk about coming forward. I mean, that was one of the things that Harold Letterman,
effective aggressiveness, not just aggressiveness, effective
aggressiveness, coming forward. I know the technology exists to gauge how much someone is coming forward in a situation. There's a way to judge. There's a way to analyze it. If you see some of the analytics that are used in other sports, there is a way to, because it's all a program. It's all an algorithm. It's all this technology exists if you give the right engineers the initiative to create it.
Right.
And perhaps this is that situation. This is a situation where you open the door for someone to come in and say, hey, we want to blow this thing out. And from an analytics standpoint, we want to give people more information than they've ever had about watching a fight. And maybe that helps to shape something moving forward. If nothing else, it gives them it gives the boxing viewer a different experience than they've ever had. And perhaps it takes your mind off of not having the crowd noise, not having some of the other things that you have. And if nothing else, it's interesting.
Right. But no, you're right. I mean, I think that the idea of experimenting now and trying some things out that, look, it could start a conversation. Hey, what did fans like? What did fans not like? How do we incorporate that moving forward? But just to go back to this whole thing about, coming forward. Mm-hmm. Coming forward in itself means nothing.
Right. No.
You have to be effective.
Absolutely.
So the guy that's coming forward, the guy that's, as people say, making the fight, isn't necessarily going to win rounds if he's not effectively using that aggression.
I mean, almost every single fighter Floyd has ever fought came forward, but they didn't come forward effectively.
Right.
So it's
or he was more effective.
Right. He was more effective. I mean, a lot of guys are coming forward. They're chasing. Now, technically, they're coming forward. So that's what I mean by, if you create something like this, it has to have an algorithm built in that it has to have some sort of way to distinguish what is effective aggressiveness. And people who are not engineers and who don't think about things in that way may say, well, I don't see how you're going to ever determine which one is effective and which one isn't. I would venture to say, I think that if you give the right people the right information and the right leadership and the right guidance, I believe that there is something that could be created that could distinguish between effective aggressiveness and simply just coming forward and not being effective.
Yeah. And I think the UFC is going to have success with their no audience shows, and I'll tell you why.
And I bet you there's going to be a stat increase.
Okay, maybe, right? But what I was going to say is UFC fans have already been conditioned by watching The Ultimate Fighter. to enjoy matches that take place in front of no live audience until the finale.
Yeah.
So there have been some great matches throughout the Ultimate Fighter seasons that have literally taken place with no audience.
Well, there's an audience. It's just a very small one. It's they have a stands or bleachers there. Well, the Ultimate Fighter didn't. They kind of have just the fighters around the cage, which is still, you still get the reaction. Right. You can still hear it. Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series, which effectively took the place of the Ultimate Fighter, has a small audience. It's about 50 to 65 people that are
as opposed to 18,000.
As opposed to 18,000.
So they're used to that
experience. Yeah, it's definitely. And then, like I mentioned to you before, fights that are early in the prelims, get. I mean, literally, they're on FS1, they're on ESPN, they're on ESPN Plus, and there are way more people watching those early prelim fights than what watches early boxing prelim fights. You know, there's hardly nobody's watching those on television on stream. A larger audience are watching the early UFC fights. So to your point, they are far more accustomed to that. So, all right. So let's go ahead into our first between the rounds. Peter, you are up on that one.
So we're now in day 40 something of quarantine. COVID-19 has really become a worldwide event. It's been a very serious situation. One of the places that had some, very strict rules as to not leaving their house has been the Philippines. And Manny Pacquiao is still in the Philippines, and he's there in quarantine just like the rest of us. And, we've talked about this before, which is, without COVID-19, without quarantine, really what was left of Manny Pacquiao's career, what that would look like, who we would fight, and how that would play out. Well, now we're looking at the fact that, does this pandemic, does the quarantine, does boxing not returning, because Manny Pacquiao can't fight in front of no audience. Manny Pacquiao needs a pay-per-view event where you're going to get 18,000 people in an arena, and the whole fanfare and everything that goes along with it. Could this end up KOing the rest of his career? Arguably one of the top fighters in the history of boxing, top 3 in my opinion. Is he going to have the opportunity to go out on the high level in a normal environment that he's used to? Or does he just sort of quietly ride off onto the sunset with no finale? And that's really kind of what I want to hear you talk about in the championship rounds.
Absolutely. And I do have some thoughts about that, and I can't wait to share them with you. But for now, we're going to go ahead and jump into round 2, and we have an awesome guest that we want to speak to about what we're talking about in round 1. Okay, it is our pleasure to bring in a figurehead in the world of boxing. He is a newly inducted member of the Boxing Hall of Fame, former head of HBO Boxing, currently a promoter, the founder of DiBella Promotions, Lou DiBella. How you doing today, Lou?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Isolating comfortably. I'm all right.
Yes. Like everyone. It's I never thought I'd see so many in-home shots of so many people who we never see at home.
No, it's actually crazy. But I got to tell you something. I thought they did a pretty good job. I'm putting the light up in the room. I thought they did a pretty good job in the NFL draft last night. It was actually watchable.
I thought so too.
It was nice to have something that related to real sports.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. So I would love to know, everybody's talking about this, and I think things that have happened with the UFC is what has everyone really talking about it even more. And that's how boxing is going to look when it comes back. Because I think everybody knows when it first comes back, it's probably going to be without a live audience. So I would love to hear, an industry veteran like yourself, your take on what you think it's going to look like.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's got to be some level of creativity, particularly if we're going to be doing boxing in an empty room for a prolonged period of time. So I think people are going to have to work on how to make it as presentable and entertaining as possible, because in an empty room without crowd noise, hearing the coach's instructions to the fighter, it has to be a really good fight to be good television. You know, my concern is I don't know that you're going to get the biggest and best fights in an empty room.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be impediments to that. Like, for example, can you see a Canelo and Triple G happening in an empty room?
No.
When Canelo's contracted to a streaming service, so it's not even pay-per-view as a possibility. I don't see that happening, and I don't see the fighters wanting to fight that kind of fight in an empty room. So I think you're going to see more, maybe some matchups that are, you know, getting guys in the ring. I personally want to see competitive fighting. I don't really care the names of the fighters at this point. I just want to see something where the outcome is in doubt and there's live competition. So I think that boxing's going to fill a void eventually, and we'll be back. But in terms of the bigger fight, like the more expensive stuff, I don't know how it's going to be presented. I don't know if they've thought that through yet. And also, I'm curious as to, like, you heard the other day, didn't you think it was sort of wild when Bud Crawford said, if I'm going to fight in an empty room, I want to get paid more money? Like, dude, like, I hear you. It's like not pleasant to fight or work in an empty room or do anything. You're an entertainer. I can get that you don't want to be in an empty room, but where do you think there's going to be more money for that? You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, part of that money comes from the crowded room.
Look, here's what's going to happen also. In order to make really good fights, like big-name fighters in competitive fights, when there's less revenue, the fighter has to want to work with the television entity, with the promoter. The fighter's going to have to want to work to make the fight possible. The question's going to be, are fighters going to be willing to leave money on the table for significant or dangerous fights from the get-go? If I'm right, unfortunately, my experience tells me it's going to take a while for there to be an adjustment to the new world.
Yeah.
And so I don't see guys running to say, I'm willing to take less for a better fight or a more competitive fight. So I think the guys that are going to come back are the guys most willing to negotiate. And I also think it's going to be highly competitive fights that were already put together that aren't particularly expensive, where the gate is not going to completely destroy the economics of the event.
Now, you were mentioning, I'm sorry, Peter.
Go ahead, please. I talk too often. It's okay.
No, okay. I got this one kind of concept in my head, and I just wonder just how you would see this. I totally agree that they're going to have to be extremely creative, and I think Peter and I talked about that, of how you make in-studio boxing deliver some things that maybe the traditional presentation of boxing doesn't deliver. If they approach the fighter, say even a fighter that you promote, and said, hey, you know what, we got to do some different stuff with this presentation, but we're willing to try to build your brand, make this worth your while, and produce this in something of like a documentary style, even like live as we're doing this whole entire fight. We're giving and we're going to sell this experience in a different way in hopes of increasing this engagement. Do you think that's one of those things?
Anything is open right now.
Okay.
I think everything is open. I think this is a period where we have to weather a storm, and we also have to make sure that fighters can earn a living, and that goes beyond just the star big name guys. So I think, you know, if they want to see shorter rounds and experiment with shorter fights, if they want to see competitive 6 and 8 rounders between pro fighters, if they want to look at producing in a different way and making it look more like a gladiator thing, because it's just, you really want to keep people away from people. I mean, I think we're going to have to be open to some levels of creativity. Right.
Have you heard any of that stuff?
Kicking around ideas, but at the same time, you got to remember something. We're state regulated. Medicals have to go through states. Doctors are involved. There's all sorts of politics involved to boxing. A lot more politically involved in doing boxing right now than doing MMA, because MMA is much more its own self-contained world. So they have it a little bit easier. I mean, they're regulated by certain states, but very differently than boxing is. So, like, I expect Dana to be able to do an event in May, and as scheduled. I would bet this time it happens. But I don't think he has the same roadblocks that we have. He may have roadblocks from going at the Apex in Nevada, but I don't think he has the same roadblocks to do an event someplace. to try to do it in a safe manner and do it someplace, because like for example, in a boxing match, the referees, the judges, they're all state regulated too.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to do a fight that involves an organization or a title of any kind, and then you have other people involved. How do those people get there? Is there travel? What? There's so many issues. We're so far away from being able to figure out exactly how this would work. But I'm going to guess that somewhere midsummer, you'll see boxing in a studio setting with no crowd.
I mean, when do we really realistically think that we're going to see people back in arenas?
I have my doubts on 20. I'd be surprised if it was this year.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe within a certain select market or so, but
right.
People travel to that event. I mean, might there be in a state where there hasn't been a big outbreak or whatever, boxing with some level of distancing in the crowd or whatever? I think you could see something before the end of the year, but I don't think, like for example, take my state, I don't think you're going to see boxing in front of an audience in New York State in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, and look, with all these shows that are coming back, and you and I have talked about this, for the audience that doesn't know, I manage two fighters that Lou promotes, George Kambosos Jr., who was supposed to be fighting Lee Selby on May 9th, Lou? May 9th for the IBF Eliminator to face the winner of Lomachenko Lopez. And also we work together with Emmanuel Tego, who's a top-rated lightweight. Of which I want to point out, unlike a lot of promoters, Lou really stepped up and paid Tego's full purse for a fight he never fought in March that was going to take place in Atlantic City. But what I was going to say is, even when things come back in the studio environment, like Lou said, it's going to really be up to the fighters that are able to agree and be able to turn around quickly and be prepared for a fight. Let alone the medicals that need to be done. These guys have to have some sort of a camp. Not everyone has the ability to train. Like not every fight, we see on social media guys training in a garage, doing this, not everyone has that ability. Some guys are going to have maybe 4 weeks to prepare and possibly not really have the sparring that they need. So what do you think from a preparation standpoint? What do you think it looks like?
If you were asked by one of your fighters right now, I think you would give a similar answer to what I would give. If they asked, when are we coming back? When are we going to be fighting? The answer is, we don't know.
Right. Yeah, but I tell them to do what you can, be as ready as you can. If it's just road work, shadow boxing, some sort of, calisthenics. If you can't hit a heavy back, if you can't do anything else, do the most that you can. Eat clean. I mean, stay as close to your fighting weight as possible, because eventually some iteration of this is going to exist.
Well, by staying where they're 4 or 5 weeks physically away from being able to fight. I mean, that doesn't mean I think we're going to start in 4 or 5 weeks. But I think when people start moving toward restarting, it's going to happen rather quickly, and matches are going to have to be made rather quickly. And I think fighters who are ready to fight are going to have an advantage. Mm-hmm. And frankly, fighters that are going to understand that there's not greater revenue now, there's diminished revenue, and are willing to, have their purses take into account the state of the industry. In other words, a guy that's going to hold to his a $3 million guarantee to fight an appearance fight is likely to wait longer than somebody that will take less to fight a real fight.
Yeah. Now, because we're on quarantine, and because there's not really any real boxing news to discuss right now, right? Everything is people trying to be creative and everybody trying to speculate and sort of things, because you got to keep the conversation going. I got to ask you, as someone who has been around the business so long, and also somebody who's pretty active on social media, especially on Twitter, what are some of the things that you hear that kind of drive you crazy, that you see consistently during this time?
I mean, I there's a bunch of little things, okay, like that, and maybe I got to be honest, I'm getting like complete cabin fever, and I'm probably testier and more like easily pissed off than I usually am, okay? But like listening to guys call each other out and talk trash at each other, who don't seem to have any desire to want to make those fights happen when fighting is actually going on, and now they're all of a sudden, oh, we don't fight for any particular side of the street, and we just want to fight, and we're ready to sign a piece of paper, and we'll fight tomorrow. No, you won't. And some of that, but we know what we need to keep relevant. We need to keep sort of chirping at each other. I get that. I looking for controversies that aren't really there. I mean, I thought Devin Haney said something stupid, but to hear someone associate a black kid saying, I ain't gonna lose to a white boy, with indicating that that's somehow some heinous act of racism is trash. It's just not true, and that bothered me. It bothered me that I think that how overblown that was. Honestly.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can hear you.
I also think the idea we're going to come back bigger and better than ever immediately, and everything's going to, this Trumpian sort of boxing view that we're going to come back and you're going to see the biggest and best fights, and everyone's going to get right to the bottom line. We're going to pop right back in empty rooms with Spence and Crawford and Wilder and Fury and no, we're not. We're going to get back to living something of a normal life in stages and slowly, the way the whole rest of the country is going to, the way restaurants are going to open when they eventually do, the way Broadway in New York City will open eventually when it does. But we don't know when that is yet. And when it happens, it's going to be sort of a process and a gradual thing. So I prefer for people to be like preparing for what's real as opposed to like living in a world of fantasy, and thinking that everything will get back to normal in a couple of months is fantasy.
I mean, I do think that boxing is in a better position than some other major sports. And as you know, for the viewers that don't know, you own 2 minor league baseball teams. I mean, there are some sports that have no shot at coming back. I mean, what are you facing right now with baseball?
I don't know about Major League Baseball. I mean, they could go through that expense and the negotiation with their own players to figure out how to make it work and try to do it in a controlled setting. And I think I've read stuff that they're still trying to see if they can save a season. I would be shocked if there's going to be a minor league season because we have no TV or radio money. We're completely dependent on, the live gate and the live experience, the concessions and the beer sales and food and all the other stuff that goes into a live game experience. And we're not going to be able to have crowds in Richmond, Virginia, probably this season. So I'm thinking that it's likely that we're going to probably not have a season. That's hard to deal with. Boxing is easier to come back from the standpoint of having fewer participants. There's just 2 fighters in the ring. You may have to rethink the closeness of the referee. But the judges, there are a number of people that have to gather in a ringside area between production people, commission people, promoter people, people setting up the event. You still have to have some gathering of people around that ring. So there's a lot of logistics that have to be worked out, but it's certainly easier than staging a football game.
Right, but and let's be real. I mean, boxing, some of these events are not contingent on the gate revenue. I mean, April 17th, as you know, I think you guys had Indongo fighting Yulusinoff. I had Chris Van Heerden fighting DeMarco in Oklahoma. I mean, how many tickets was Top Rank selling anyway? 1,500, 2,000 tickets to that show?
There's a whole level of event that the gate is really not that important.
Right.
Strangely, because there are a lot of highly paid fighters and champions who frankly don't sell tickets, even though they get paid a lot of money for services. Those fights are sort of cost effective. Where it's not cost effective is a fight that could do a $15 million, $20 million gate. Then it makes no sense to do a fight in front of nobody. You don't burn that fight in front of nobody.
But I'm sure you have fighters in the stable that, when you really look at I mean, let's be honest, you were willing to put that show on in Atlantic City with Tego and Ray Perez, and the anticipation of a big gate probably wasn't there. But, you're able to have your UFC Fight Pass participation, and you're able to get that fight out there.
There are ways to make it work. I mean, it can work on various levels of significance too. I mean, is there a level of fight that works for DAZN? I tend to think that if Prograis and Hooker was the first fight back on, boxing main event back on U.S. soil and on TV here, it would do an enormous viewership.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a lot more cost effective than a Triple G or a Canelo fight, or a Wilder or Fury fight, or a Joshua fight. I think people are going to get creative. I think Eddie's I really believe Matchroom will probably begin by doing events in the UK. I think you might see some events in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia or Dubai again, where there has not really been much of an outbreak. And where you can privately fly in and work out probably logistics easier than you may in some other places.
Right.
But I'm really I'm sort of as curious as you are to see how we come back.
Do you think that the first fighters back will have an opportunity to create a bigger name for themselves and to enhance their brands? Because if promoters and networks are really getting behind it properly, they'll be like, okay, these two guys are literally ushering the sport back into the United States.
I don't know, because here's what I think. You still have three, the most secure entities as platforms for boxing are still PBC through Fox and Showtime, ESPN and Top Rank, and DAZN, and Cole and Matchroom and Hearn. Mm-hmm. And they all have a lot of fighters under contract. And I don't think we're going to be getting back to 4 fight cards a weekend, when it's not returning in a giant flourish. Mm-hmm. When it's so difficult to do it. It's going to be much more expensive to stage a fight in front of no one, with the testing and distancing and other details that are going to have to be followed to make it work. Mm-hmm. It's more expensive to do that, and you're getting far less revenue for most events. So, it's not. It's certainly not an ideal way to restart things.
So, Brian, I have one more question for Lou, because I know Lou has to go here soon, but I wanted your opinion, Lou. So the longer that this goes on, some of these bigger fights like Lomachenko, Lopez, Canelo, Triple G, some of these guys are going to have a lot of inactivity. I mean, by the time Lomachenko theoretically fights Lopez, he could have been out of the ring for a year. Do you think they go straight into fights like that, or do you think that, the fans think that all of a sudden it's just going to come back and it's going to be the best of the best?
No, because fighters are still going to have their self-interest in mind. If you haven't fought for a long, long time, and you just went through a stressful thing like the whole rest of the country did, you want to come back in a completely alien circumstance, in an empty room, when you never fought in front of an empty room, even when you were an amateur. You virtually never fought in front of nobody. You're going to come back in a socially distanced, empty room without proper gym training, without what you're used to, and come right back into the hardest fight of your career. No, guys are going to be resistant to that. And and by the way, you can't totally blame them. Now, other guys are going to come back and say, just put someone in front of me. I don't give a blank. I want to fight. Put someone in front of me, and let's discuss what you're paying me, and let's go. Right. And going to what you said, Brian, could somebody be advantaged now through this? The way someone would be advantaged is by coming in this and saying, I understand what's going on out there. I just want to get in the ring. Let's work out a deal that works for both of us to get me back in the ring. I'll do what it takes. Let's figure it out. And that guy could become somebody's hero.
Yeah. That's kind of how I was picturing it. I'm picturing somebody who might not have normally gotten that shine, but because they were willing to play ball, they were able to get some exposure, maybe even get a couple wins, and suddenly this time ended up launching their career.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to be Brian McGlow. I sort of think when this comes back, promoters and television services or streaming entities are going to be going to fighters and saying, this is the fight I want you to fight. And if they say no, or they start negotiating too hard, I think they're going to move on to one of the other 100 fighters they have to take care of with a limited number of slots. So I just think it's going to change by nature. So if you're the fighter that's going to approach it with the attitude of, I'm going to do what I need to do, Also, I think the tough fights that were made, fights like Selby Kambosos, which was a very affordable fight, not an expensive fight, but a very competitive fight. I expect that fight to be easier to happen. A fight like Prograis and Hooker, where there were two big names in a 50-50 fight, getting paid on the lower end of the big money, on the low end of the big money. You know, those fights, and a fight like that, by the way, wasn't anticipating, as Peter pointed out earlier, that was the kind of fight where you weren't anticipating a huge gate. You know, so the economics of the event don't totally get warped. I think those kind of fights should be the first ones that you're going to see coming back. Also, so they happen to be quality fights, which you don't want to come back with, in an empty room, something that's less than entertaining.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Lou, I certainly appreciate your time, and I hope that you're staying safe. The next time, hopefully, we get a chance to talk to you, we got to talk about some old school hip hop, because we often vibe on Twitter when we're talking about some of the stuff. And I'm like, yeah, Lou and I's playlist is probably similar. So,
Similar. Did you know, I was watching the NFL draft last night, so I didn't see it, but there was a whole streaming hip hop thing with a lot of old school talent.
It was a lot of old school talent, and then they've been doing, like, I don't know if you saw the DJ battle with DJ Premier and the RZA. They did a DJ battle. It was pretty awesome. So yeah. All right. So again, thanks so much to Lou DiBella for joining us. Hopefully we get an opportunity to talk to him again. But we're going to shift gears a little bit. We got to talk about the UFC. UFC is dominating the combat sports conversation today on this Friday. UFC 249 goes even more official than it had been before. We knew that Dana was going to bring the UFC back on May 9th, but he has turned it up even more so today. So we do have confirmation from several sources, including Brett Okamoto of ESPN, that UFC 249 will indeed be taking place in Jacksonville, Florida. This is something that Peter and I kind of already knew. It wasn't really solid enough for us to like really run out and say, hey, here's what it is. But we knew, based off of just the logistics and different things and different people that were involved, that this was going to more than likely take place in Florida. So it is going to be at Jacksonville, Florida, at VyStar Memorial Arena. Veterans Memorial Arena. And not only is that event going to be taking place next month, on the week of May 9th, they're also dropping 3 events that week. You want to talk about playing catch up. And this is a statement from Florida Commission Executive Director Patrick Cunningham. He says, our commission stands ready to sanction the events to be held on May 9th, 13th, and 16th. Health and safety protocols will be in place to ensure the safety and well-being of all individuals. So this is going to take place. I know there's going to be all kinds of things, all sorts of, different parameters set up for the fighters, anybody else that needs to be there. This was really precipitated by an executive order that came from the governor's office maybe 2-3 weeks ago, which kind of laid the groundwork for this. And so I preface this by saying I'm very excited about the return of combat sports. But obviously, I'll be more excited once I know that this all can come forward and go forward in safety. And so I'm going to talk to Peter about how he sees this impacting, and how quickly after this goes over, we could see boxing and maybe even some other MMA promotions jump into Florida and doing things there as well. So it's an interesting situation, interesting time for UFC. All right, but with that said, we're going to jump into round 3, and it is time to ask the fight guys. And we know we love it. We love it. We love it when we're asked anything, because people don't like to ask us things sometimes. And if sometimes they don't even ask.
It's just criticism.
They just tell us, they tell us that we this, they tell us that we're that, but it's all good. It's all in love. So, well, not necessarily, but it's all something. So one of the comments that came through, I thought it was, I don't know, I'd have to venture to say it was a little strange, because I wasn't sure exactly where they were coming from. So I'm I hate to mess up anyone's name, so I'm going to try to get this right. But Philemoni Rokanadravu. Philemoni Rokanadravu, I believe is how you pronounce this.
Okay.
And he says, OMG, Peter. He says, OMG, Peter Kahn really must be from an alternative universe. Since when was Teofimo, a superstar, and the yardstick he used pale in comparison to what Loma offers? Fact. Fan engagements. Come on, man. Fans come in all the way from Europe, Asia, and the Americas to see Loma. And I bet that does not apply for Teofimo. Maybe you were referring to fans of different ethnic backgrounds in the U.S., and that's about it. Superstar status. Mention Teofimo, and just because this upcoming fight with Loma, that he's even being recognized. Period. So so I get what he's saying. That he's saying that the only reason people are even mentioning Teofimo and having superstar status is because he's being associated with fighting Lomachenko. Peter.
So look, I mean, I appreciate the question, and I think to an extent, he's misunderstanding what I'm saying. And really, to kind of go back to really what my point was, Lomachenko doesn't move the needle. Okay. So it all comes down to how you define superstar. You know, promoters will tell you a superstar is someone that makes them a lot of money. Okay. Someone that they want to promote because it makes them a lot of money. People pay to come see them in person, and people will pay to watch a pay-per-view. What I am saying is that Teofimo Lopez makes this fight, and I still stand by that, because I know from the promotional standpoint, without Teofimo Lopez, this isn't a mega fight in any regard. I mean, really, this fight for the undisputed lightweight title with a guy that is undefeated, who has been walking through people, was prospect of the year, won his world title, brash, entertaining, backing up everything he says out of the ring with his performance in the ring, spectacular, finishing with his knockouts, and most recently beating Richard Comey, which was no small task, and the way that he was able to do it makes him a superstar. The fact that you will be able to sell tickets, the fact that you could make it a pay-per-view, okay, because Lomachenko can't carry it on his own. And so that was my point. I mean, look, you could disagree with me. It's fine. But I just know that from the promoter's standpoint, you know, it's been kind of tough, I think, for Lomachenko to connect with fans on the large scale. And maybe some of it is language barrier a little bit, not fully being able to express himself. You know, we saw this with Tito Trinidad, you know, just never really connected. Could have been a much bigger star than he ended up being. And I think, you know, in large part, we also see that a little bit with Canelo, you know, except Canelo sells tickets. Canelo brings people out to the MGM Grand. I'm just saying, people buy tickets. They would even buy pay-per-view. Well, so anyway, that's my. It's not like, you know. Sometimes I feel like people take these ideas personal. This, you know, but if it helps, okay. If it helps, I'm also part Ukrainian. Does that help? Does it make it any better? No. You know, okay. Does it make it any better?
No.
I did my DNA test.
Well,
family's from Odessa, in case anyone wants to know. But the point I'm making is that it's not a personal attack on Lomachenko. It's an opinion. It's an opinion based on what I know to be true from the promotional side with Top Rank. It's having that information and understanding that. Doesn't mean that Lomachenko isn't a fantastic fighter. But like I said, defining superstar and excellent fighter are two different things for me.
Absolutely. And I totally hear what you're saying. I completely disagree with what you're saying. And I honestly completely agree with Philemoni. I do. I think what you're doing is underselling the other definition of superstar. And you're looking at it straight from a business numbers, from a promoter standpoint, from a promoter manager standpoint. And I'm not saying that that's invalid or that doesn't matter, but when you look at the masses and the way the masses view a fighter, far more people will tell you that Lomachenko is a superstar than they would Teofimo. Now, I will say this: I agree that Teofimo has a far higher ceiling than Lomachenko.
Yeah. But you said this last show anyway. I mean, it's the same argument.
No, it's not. Hold on.
No, I'm saying we're saying the same things. We're saying the same things that we said last time. That's what I'm saying.
What I'm saying is,
we're sticking to our guns.
You're dismissing something, I think, and even more so now than you're dismissing an aspect of this. First of all, I do think it's too much of an American point of view, and it's almost dismissing the fact that he does have tons of fans outside of the United States who he doesn't have a language barrier with.
Yeah, tell him to buy the pay-per-view then.
Well, obviously,
just tell him to buy the pay-per-view.
Obviously, the pay-per-view setup is different in every country. So how it doesn't work at that same way in every country. Like, so in some countries, there isn't even some fights that might be on pay-per-view here are not pay-per-view in another country. Right. So we can't, that's how not even an apples to apples comparisons doesn't necessarily equate. And so obviously I know why that would be of most importance to you, because you operate your business here, and that is a major metric for you here. But that is not the only metric for determining who's a superstar from a global standpoint. Okay.
His loss to Salido, I think, tainted his professional career a little bit. His desire not to rematch him.
Now I think you're contradicting previous points, because you've made a point several times to talk about how losses are overblown
in different. So I do think, but now we're talking about superstar status. No, we're not. We're talking
a third pro fight.
No. It doesn't matter, Brian. It does matter. No, it doesn't. We're talking about superstar. We're defining superstar. We're not talking about, do I think Lomachenko is a great fighter? Of course he is.
That's not,
of course, but that's
nobody said you're not saying that. Nobody said you're not acknowledging that. We're talking about purely.
I honestly, my gut, I believe his own promoter doesn't think he's a superstar.
Well, you know what? That could be the problem, and that could be the problem and not the answer.
Well, I mean, I think they're running a business, and I think that maybe they know that to be the case. Now, they might think that Lomachenko is going to beat Lopez. Okay, doesn't mean that in their eyes, that the juice is worth the squeeze.
Well, we all know that there are promoters in all walks of combat sports who don't always recognize who they have. Doesn't mean that person's not a superstar. It just means that they haven't tapped into that person's potential the way they need to. So maybe
remember when Chocolatito was pound for pound best fighter in the world?
Yes.
Right? Awesome.
In the conversation, yes.
Well, but there are many times where people it was kind of the same way people now are looking at, in a way, as maybe being that person, right?
Same type of conversation, yeah.
But what I'm saying was Chocolatito a superstar? No. Okay, but that's what I'm saying. I'm not sitting here diminishing Lomachenko. But I'm a fan of Lomachenko. I like but I'm saying that
you're
Lopez
arguing the wrong point, because that's not what anybody's saying. What you're coming back with is not an answer to what anybody is saying.
So tell me again, what is he asking in my alternative universe?
He's not asking anything.
What is he challenging?
What he's doing is he's questioning your metrics. He's questioning your definition of a superstar.
And I gave it.
And you're coming back saying, "Oh, I'm not saying Lomachenko's not a great fighter." Well, he never said you did say that.
But I've already given my metrics for superstar. You got to move the needle in all areas. And honestly, we're talking superstar, not great fighter, not a superstar. There has to be. Well, you tell me, Brian. What the metrics to make Pacquiao a superstar? Just give me all of it.
All of it is it's all encompassing. It's social media following. It of course it's overall popularity. Okay. It's a situation where you walk up to anybody in the world and say, and now Pacquiao is on a different level of superstar status. It's not that his superstar status is even higher than a Canelo. It's even obviously higher than somebody like Lomachenko. It's a whole nother, his tier is another tier that only 2 or 3 or 4 fighters in the history of the game have ever been on, where you walk up to any human being just about walking the face of the earth and say, do you know who Manny Pacquiao is? And I don't care if it's an 85-year-old grandmother to a 7-year-old, they probably have heard of him.
Is Terence Crawford a superstar? Who's a bigger superstar, Terence Crawford or Lomachenko?
I'd say, if you're talking about globally, I would say Lomachenko.
I'm just saying superstar. I mean, are we starting to now put are we starting to put caveats on where?
It's not a caveat. It's a getting.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. So then let's talk about this. Where American? Then where does Lomachenko fight?
He fights.
We got to go apples to apples. Where does he fight?
He fights predominantly in the United States.
Well, tell me, in his professional career, where else has he fought then?
He fought in the UK when he fought Luke Campbell.
Okay. Why did he have to go to the UK, Brian? The truth.
Because there's a huge audience. Luke Campbell has a huge following. He went there to fight, but
because he needed Luke Campbell to make that fight at the O2 Arena was a much bigger fight. They sold it out because the fans came out there to support Luke Campbell. They came out to watch Lomachenko, yes, who is a fantastic fighter, but they needed Luke Campbell. They needed him, and they needed to go to the UK, because if they did Luke Campbell and Lomachenko at Madison Square Garden or the Staples Center, it wouldn't have resonated. And that's kind of why I'm saying that Lopez absolutely is needed to fight Lomachenko at Madison Square Garden, because he is going to draw and make this fight a bigger fight than it would be. So that's why I'm saying, outside of Campbell, what is Lomachenko's big? Crawford has proven he could sell out in Omaha for what it's worth. Okay. He's also proven that he's able to draw at Madison Square Garden, but who did they have to pair him with at Madison Square Garden to sell it out? He didn't sell out the Amir Khan fight. Who did they have to pair him with to sell out the Garden? Lopez against Comey. I'm only talking about it from a business standpoint, and these are my metrics in determining a superstar and the reasoning behind it.
I understand what you're saying.
It's not a knock on Lomachenko.
Nobody says it is, and why you keep mentioning that is mind-blowing, because nobody said that. No, nobody said that. So
this is my Ukrainian brother. Don't pick on him.
Yeah, right. I get it. But absolutely,
okay. I can't even do that thing that him and Usyk do, where they throw the change up and they catch it
and
before
maybe
it falls.
If you acknowledged him as a superstar, you suddenly get that ability. I don't know what it is, but maybe you also be able to work the ball against the wall thing. It's your reluctance.
He's phenomenal. I'm not saying
it's your reluctance to acknowledge him as a superstar.
Okay, fine. We'll get Bob Arum on the show and we'll say, Bob, is he a superstar?
Yeah, we can ask.
Enough with the questions.
Yeah, he'll probably tell you that. And he'll say, look at his Instagram following, and you answer me, you tell me if he's a superstar. He said, look at him. He's all over Snapface.
Are you picking on Bob?
No, I love Bob.
Okay. Bob's your guy. Bob enjoyed sitting down with you.
I met Bob one time, and it was awesome. I know all the people say all this horrible stuff about Bob. And, he was super cool to me. So that's what I have to judge.
Bob gave you a solid 20 minutes.
Yeah. And
you guys sat there and had a good conversation.
And you know what? He didn't interrupt me one time.
Oh, really? Like me?
All right. Let's head off to our next question here. This one's going to have to be short, because your constant dismissal of Lomachenko ran that one just way out of control. But, this is just what you do. It is what it is. All right. So Rod Rivas had a comment about our Abel Sanchez section. He says, I think that Abel is being honest, and he's really concerned about Triple G. I believe that he loves him like a son. I didn't hear anything bad about the way he spoke about Triple G. I do think he does care about Triple G, but I think that part of the fact that he cares about him is why he's hurt. And I think that the comments still come more from a place of hurt and reaction than they come from. I'm sincerely worried about Triple G's well-being. I don't know. I just have a hard time believing that. I don't know if you've changed your tune, Peter. I'm sure you haven't, but yeah.
I mean, look, you tell me to be a little bit more forthright and forthcoming on our show, right? To sometimes just tell it how I see it, tell it how it is. And obviously you don't like to hear it when I, make points at the end when you're dap, when I was talking about who they had to pair Crawford with. But anyway, we'll stick to the point here.
Because it was irrelevant.
I'm friends with Abel Sanchez. You know this. Okay. I'm friends with Abel. True or false?
Right, because you're Kane.
Oh my God. You don't even think about your bad jokes before you make them. So listen, don't even start. This show could end if I start trying to pronounce the name of that guy from Nigeria. It'll be over.
Yeah, it'll be over.
So let's just stay on point here, okay?
Yes, you got it.
So, Abe and I have talked about this. We were riding somewhere and we were talking about this. And look, I know that his feelings are this. And for the person, thank you for your comment. Thank you for your question. What we talked about wasn't if there was anything that was said bad. Mm-hmm. It was just wondering if Abel was still working with Triple G. Would he be out there saying, "Oh, I'm concerned for his safety," or him having damage in a third Canelo fight? What I'm saying is that if they were together, he wouldn't be saying that. He'd be talking about how they have the game plan that's going to win the third fight. Yeah. Okay, so that's what I was saying. But I do know, Abel felt disrespected, being asked to take a pay cut. You signed your biggest contract after being with somebody for a long time, having a lot of success. You signed your biggest contract with DAZN, and then you come back and want to lower the trainer's fee, which, by the way, in boxing is traditionally 10%. Mm-hmm. So now, after all the success you had together, you come back and you switch trainers because your trainer, who you've been with, doesn't want to renegotiate. So sure, I understand being bitter or disrespected and hurt. Okay. But what I was talking about was the fact that I don't feel Abel would have been singing that tune if they were still working together. Mm-hmm. That's all the comment was. It wasn't, did Abel say something bad? He didn't say anything bad. In fact, he was saying something that seemed very protective. Mm-hmm. Maybe honest. You know what I mean? Maybe honest, which maybe he wouldn't have said that if they were still working together. And I think he was also basing it off of Gennadi's performance against Derevyanchenko, but maybe he's also underestimating the fact that Derevyanchenko is also a very, very strong middleweight that lost a split decision to Danny Jacobs and snuck out of MSG with a win against Golovkin. I mean, left there with a very close loss. Mm-hmm. Arguably, he could have won. Okay. So my whole point was not about did Abel say something bad. It was he was being honest, right? That was my thing. Is he being honest?
So or you believe he's being honest?
I believe that he's being honest, but he wouldn't be this honest if he was still working with him.
See, I wonder. I wonder if he's being 100% honest. I wonder if it's just I'm saying this
maybe
because I want to disparage him a little bit, kind of like a little shot.
diminish him a little bit.
Yeah,
But Abel was pissed.
It's what they call throwing shade. It's what
throwing shade. Okay,
that's what it looked like. It's like you're throwing a little shade.
Well, what do you think? What do you think?
I feel like that's what it was. I don't feel like he's concerned with. Obviously he's trained him. He's been in sparring sessions with him and all of this stuff. He knows his stamina, how deep the tank goes. I remember he gave this this explanation that I thought was absolutely hilarious. They were talking about how visually Golovkin looks winded at certain points. He takes these big, huge, deep breaths, and he's looking winded. He's fighting winded. And Abel says, "Oh no, he's not winded. That's a breathing technique that he."
Brian, wasn't this an interview we did with him?
Maybe it was. I think it was. Yes, it was.
It was an interview we did with him.
He said, and I'm like, I'm like, bro, he tired.
But I got to tell you this though. but I do believe that he sincerely had a really good bond with him.
Oh, absolutely.
He
and
told
I think
me
that's what this comes from.
Yeah, he told me stories about them in Kazakhstan and Gennady trying to get him to drink horse milk, and just, you know, a lot of funny stories. There seemed to be a really strong bond, and then I think that he felt that disrespect when he was asked to take a pay cut when Gennady got his biggest contract of his career.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you, and I'm gonna say this, and this is me. This is Brian Mazique talking. It's the brown guy on the left. I think that Abel really needs this thing with Golovkin. He needs this connection, because the history of his trainer-fighter relationships, Golovkin is by far like his shining metal as a fighter. And I don't know. We had Buddy McGirt on this show, and Buddy was talking about certain trainers who get a lot of credit, and I'm not sure they're as good a trainer as they are with certain fighters. And I'm gonna be honest with you, one of the first names that came to my mind when he was saying that was Abel Sanchez. I was almost wondering, was he referring to him when he was saying that? So it's an interesting situation. I really think that it's almost like a Tom Brady, Bill Belichick thing. And so now that Brady is left New England and going to Tampa Bay, you gotta will Golovkin prove that he didn't need Abel Sanchez? He's able to do it without him. And then will Abel Sanchez get another fighter where he can raise that guy up to a championship level? So it's an interesting parallel to me.
But in fairness to Abel, okay, and for people that might not know,
Terry.
Before that, he was Jesus Salud, Terry Norris, Miguel Angel Gonzalez, Orlin Norris, and there are more, you know,
but none on Golovkin's level.
Well, but there aren't many. There aren't many fighters.
Terry Norris was a freak, though. He was,
but there aren't many like Golovkin. But I also will say this: Golovkin he looked terrible against Derevyanchenko, not taking anything away from Derevyanchenko, but I thought Derevyanchenko won that fight. And before that, you know, he was in a somewhat of a competitive tune-up. Who did he stop in the 5th round? Steve, was it Steve?
From
Canada.
Yes. I don't know why I'm
drawing a blank.
Rolls.
Right.
Steve Rolls.
So my point is this: if you're telling me that Golovkin looked really good in his last 2 fights, you know, I don't know. But you know what we're going to know? We're going to know. I mean, look, there's also that intersection of age and wear and tear.
Yeah.
The 2 fights with Canelo probably took a lot out of him.
Yes.
The Derevyanchenko fight definitely took a lot out of him. And look, for me, I was at the Jacobs fight. Jacobs, I believe, showed this blueprint, the first person to really show the blueprint, how to pressure and let your hands go against Golovkin, and you can make stuff happen. Because he came back to almost steal that fight. Yeah,
getting dropped if he doesn't get dropped in round 4, I mean, we're talking about something. If he doesn't get dropped in round 4, he wins the fight on Max DeLuca's card.
Right.
And on Don Trella and Steve Weisfeld's card, it becomes very, very close. So
right. But in fairness to Abel, he's still with Gassiev, I believe, the cruiserweight. And Abel's a phenomenal trainer. Like, I don't want people to get it twisted. Like, Abel is a phenomenal trainer. This wasn't like one, you know, scenario where he got lucky and Golovkin walked into his gym. You know, I've known Abel since, like I said, the early 90s, and I watched him train fighters. I mean, I've seen him at work in the corner. Golovkin's a once-in-a-generation type of guy, but they did have a great chemistry. They had a great run. The way that he was let go was basically because he just wouldn't accept that when you get the biggest contract of your career, you want me now to take less money.
Oh, yeah. And
I don't blame him, man. I find that to be disrespectful and ungrateful. You hear me?
No, I understand. I totally understand why he would be upset. I mean, it doesn't matter. All that other stuff.
I don't care if it's a 2% difference.
Yeah.
His 10% is 10%.
the other stuff doesn't matter. We spent this time together. We trained together. Before I started training you, nobody really knew who you were. Now everybody knows. And we can argue about who did it or who's the biggest reason why. The fact of it matter is it was me in this gym with you. It was me and doing these training sessions with you. It was me doing this stuff with you. So while you get paid, I ought to get paid too. So
what was it post fight Canelo to comments that might have rubbed Gennady the wrong way that kind of led to that too?
It could have been. Maybe, you never know. It's a lot of things, man. It could.
Right. But to answer the question, I don't think we thought Abel said anything bad. We were just questioning the authenticity of his concern.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. So let's move on to our championship round. I'm going to talk about what you mentioned with Manny. This has been quite the disagreeable show, because here's the thing. I'm going to disagree with you again, or not. I'm going to disagree with to me, I think you set some boundaries that are totally not really, they don't have to be as stiff as I think you make them out to be sometimes. Like you're saying, does this have to be the end of Manny's career? You said Manny needs an audience. He needs to fight in front of 15, 16,000 people, 19, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think he needs that if you're not going to conform to what the reality is right now. Manny has made so much money as a fighter already. Manny has all these other things that he's involved with. Why does Manny have to have the same exact profit, the same exact take, just because that's what he's always gotten? Here's the thing. Manny is an older fighter. Manny probably only has 1 or 2 fights left just because of his age, just period. And then other commitments. He's probably the future president of the Philippines, right? Mm-hmm. So because of all of these different things,
right,
the clock is as big of a impediment for Manny right now as the coronavirus and COVID-19 is, because while a lot of other fighters can't wait to get back out there, they are not on the wrong side of 40. So they don't have that same clock that they're battling. Manny has the clock that he's battling. If he truly wants to get out there and fight again, and Lou mentioned this, it's about people saying, okay, I know what it is. I know this situation. I'm willing to go ahead and do this in the format that it is right now. So why can't Manny say, you know what? We're not going to be able to have an audience, but I know for a fact if I don't fight soon, it's probably not a good idea for me to fight at all. So I'm going to go ahead and conform this. We're going to make sure that our presentation is like this. We're going to make sure that this is in place. I'm going to do a all access sort of a thing for my camp. I'm going to make it work in what it is. To suggest that this just absolutely is to assume that Manny would not ever accept the fact that he's not going to make the same amount in the same ways that he normally would. At some point, he's going to have to say, either I want to fight again in this current climate, or I'm just going to say that was my last fight. And I don't know that would be something he's just going to accept if he truly wants to fight again.
Yeah, those are good points. I mean, I was really posing the question, okay, which was what does this mean for him? Because have you had an opportunity to be at a Manny fight?
No, not in person. No.
It's just this energy. It's the whole base that travel, that support him. It's, such a great. It's like when you see McGregor and you see that fan base that comes, right? I'm trying to use
hiding following.
Yeah, it's. There's something about Pacquiao when he fights, even now, it's like a movement, It is. It's like a bunch of happy, positive, pro Pacquiao fans, win or lose. It's a celebration, right? And the other thing is this, whoever he fights, it's such a big payday for them. It's such a big payday for them. And aside from a pay-per-view that can generate a lot of money, the gate revenue helps the promoter offset that expense. So the question is not so much will Manny accept it? Will his opponent accept it? Will they accept potentially making less money to fight Manny as opposed to the more money they would have made under a traditional environment? Manny's set up with his home in General Santos City to have a full training camp and have sparring partners live there and literally have no issues. He wouldn't skip a beat. Would his opponent potentially have that? That type of setup and the ability to fully prepare the amount of time they would need to prepare to fight someone like Manny? Would the revenue be there in order to satisfy that other person? And, is Manny going to go out per se in a studio show versus on someone's shoulders in an arena? I'm going to tell you something. I wasn't at the Thurman fight, but I was at the Broner fight. And there's something that's stuck in my head. I was in the back. So when Manny came after the fight, when he was finally done and he's coming back, he's in his trunks and he's running with his finger up in the air. He's running through the back with it. And it's just, there's that excitement, that energy, that love for, I think, fighting in front of a crowd. All I'm saying is that someone that's had such a storied career as Manny, this would be an unfortunate way for him to have a grand finale. That's all I was kind of, putting out there. And I just want to see what you thought about that.
Well, I'm not suggesting that it's ideal. Oh, it's no big deal. It won't happen. It won't be a big deal. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is, I am not convinced that it would not be successful, and it would not be ultra memorable, and it would not even set a different sort of precedence in some sort of way. Like if Manny was to say,
but there would be a pay cut.
You know what?
For everybody involved.
I think there'd be a pay cut from a traditional standpoint, but I think that one thing that I noticed is that hardship creates ingenuity, and it generates a new level of creativity in human beings, especially when we're talking about finding new ways to earn.
Right.
And at one point, money and promoters earn money now. That was a risky thing to do, or the first time something like that had ever been done. And somebody probably told the innovators of those different avenues that, man, nobody's ever done that before. Oh, I don't know about that. At some point, there's a situation that arises that forces your hand to open your mind up to a different way to earn. And I'm wondering what sort of advertising concepts that could be entertained that aren't currently really being taken advantage of in a major way right now that you could do. Just like I said, from a presentation standpoint, you're talking about product placement, you're talking about brand placement, all these different sorts of things are not currently a part of traditional earning models, like as much as they could be.
Right.
I think those things are there. I mean, like you're talking about 24/7s and all access. Those things are like 3 episodes now, right? If Manny says, "This is my last fight, and we're gonna bring you along for the entire journey,"
right?
And that's a whole production in itself. The fighter who comes along has to agree to be along for the all access thing as well. Like you said, there's no payday like a Manny payday. I can sit up and say, hey, the payday would have been much bigger if we could have had crowds here, but guess what? We can't have crowds here. Manny's 40 something years old. This is your last chance to fight Manny. You either take this involvement, which is still going to be more money you can make anywhere else.
I think Lou made that point.
Or you can sit up and say,
right,
nah, because this ain't going to be as big as it would have been if we had crowds. So, and to me, that's kind of how this whole thing shakes out. It's just a matter of how creative can you be to make as much money as possible under the current parameters.
Yeah,
that's it. That's
Manny's just so iconic that you want to see your icons leave a certain way. And so for me, that was kind of where I was, what I was getting at. Like, you want him to leave with some sort of big ceremonial type of send-off.
But sometimes things don't work out exactly, obviously, as they could. I mean, to be honest, obviously, I don't know. I mean, Mayweather's not an icon to as many people as Manny is, but you think people want to remember the last fight Mayweather had in the ring being against Tenshin Nasukawa or even Conor McGregor?
Well, but look, wasn't Andre Berto the real last
Andre
boxing
Berto
match?
was the real last boxing.
Right. But then McGregor was such a massive event.
It was a massive event, but
didn't that give Floyd 50?
Yeah.
I mean, but it was such a massive event. I mean, he did ride off into the sunset all the way to the bank. I think for Manny, though, we'll see what happens. Maybe he'll just ride it out, be patient. I think he's the kind of guy that probably feels that even if it ended up being a year and a half, 2 years between fights, he would still come back for one big mega send off.
Yeah, I think he would. I think he would. I think he'll work within the parameters. All right. So our second championship rounds. This was about me talking about UFC 249, 3 events in the same week. I got to hear what you got to say about that.
Look, you quoted Patrick Cunningham, a friend of mine who's also the executive director of the Florida State Athletic Commission, who they've always been open for business. I will say that for me, safety is the biggest key. If the UFC is able to provide an environment where there's testing and it's safe, I think it's going to be well-received entertainment. I think that it's going to set the tone for how combat sports could move forward. When I was trying to explain to Lou earlier that boxing and MMA is probably the best suited from a personnel standpoint, the ability to not have to, I think it would be a lot stranger to play an NFL game in an 80,000 seat stadium with no one there. I think that'll be a lot. I think you can pull off MMA and boxing and still add some components and some other parts of the production and things like that you had mentioned earlier that can make it work. Not only do I think UFC 249 is gonna be a great card, as you keep pointing out, I think that fans are going to enjoy watching it on television, and will really. I think the idea of a live audience not being there isn't going to kill the show. I think it's still going to. I think the competitors are still going to go in there and perform just as they would in front of a big audience. Obviously the energy's not there. No one's feeling that lift that you get, that adrenaline boost maybe but I think we're going to see people adapting to this new norm. I think that from so many perspectives, the fact that people are hungry for live sports, I think that from the sports betting component, people being able to finally bet on some sports again. And like I said, if all the safety precautions are taken and this can be done mitigating as much risk as possible, I think you run more risk going to the grocery store to restock up on food than anyone's going to encounter in this environment, because you don't get tested every time you walk back into the grocery store or go to the bank or put gas in your car. I think in large part what's going to happen is they're going to have this protocol, they're going to abide by it, and hope for the best. But I definitely think that there's nothing wrong with it, and I don't see why anyone else would think there's anything wrong with it. I think that it's going to be a welcome distraction from everything that everyone's been going through, and I really believe it's going to end up being the event that opens the door quickly for boxing to get into the picture, and for the UFC to just start moving forward in this new normal until they're able to put people in arenas.
I would agree. I would 100% agree. And you reminded me, I need to go on Whole Foods app and order some salmon and some new drip. I can dig that right now. They didn't have it at the grocery store yesterday, but that's all we got for today. We, as usual, we appreciate you watching every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you watch us on YouTube, watch us on Fight TV, subscribe and like on YouTube, and subscribe to the Fight TV app. For Peter Kahn, I appreciate you watching as always. We appreciate you watching. God bless.